This week, the Royal Commission into the Violence, Abuse, Neglect and Exploitation of People with Disability reported after a long and expensive inquiry. $600 million, the most expensive Royal Commission in history. The report, with 222 recommendations for reform, sets out a commendable vision for the future of people with a disability in this country. A future where people with disability live free from violence, abuse, neglect and exploitation. Human rights are protected and individuals live with dignity, equality and respect, can take risks and develop and fulfil their whole potential. It sounds really good and an absolutely worthy goal. But with the Commissioners split on the most critical of the recommendations and a deep-seated ideology appearing to trump practical matters, there's a real risk that the work of the Commission will end up resting on the shelf. The first of those recommendations is about the future of special schools. In the community I call home, the special school is valued and respected by parents in the community. It's got a waiting list that could fill it several times over. But some commissioners recommended they be phased out so that no new special schools or classrooms are built from 2025 onwards, and that all existing schools be closed with no students by 2051. Now, a lot of the ideology around how to treat disability in the modern age is about ending segregation. Now, applied with proportionality, that's a really worthwhile objective. But let's be real, given disabilities can take many different forms and have varying levels of impact on a person's quality of life, one size really doesn't fit all. And while some kids with a disability will benefit enormously from mainstream education, others would experience disengagement and ultimately be harmed by that approach. Special schools are really important for some families, and we shouldn't stigmatise those teachers and principals and families that do great work in this space. But here's the rub. 3 commissioners made this recommendation, 3 out of 6. But the Royal Commission didn't hold hearings into special schools. They didn't visit even one. They didn't hear from organisations of parents who seek these important services. And they didn't hear from the well-respected organisation of principals of special schools. They just took the grievances of a small group of activists in this space and seemed to have run with it. And now, in today's Sydney Morning Herald, Commissioner Rhonda Galbally has, in a move that's quite unusual for a Royal Commissioner, commented on the internal processes and said, this aspect was, quote, very disappointing, close quote. She added, quote, some of us raised it many times and would have wished it was different, close quote. Now, it's a pretty interesting comment, given she was one of the commissioners who supported the most radical of the findings. And it's strange too, because if anyone could have decided to hold hearings into special schools, well, one would expect that if anyone had the power to do so, it was a Royal Commissioner. It's all a little bit too little too late to complain about it after the fact when you had the power to set the procedures and make it so. The recommendation is particularly radical because it's not supported by evidence that, in the firmly ideological form it was recommended, that it will work. In Italy, where this has been implemented and tried, it's been an absolute disaster that special schools have been banned. The idea was legislated in Portugal, but the government there admits that it hasn't put it into practice because it can't afford to. It's simply not practical from the perspective of financial sustainability. And in New Brunswick in Canada, a province about the size of Tasmania, of a fairly rural kind of character, it has been implemented, and both their education system and their life outcomes for people with disabilities have been a basket case since, and a political omelette no one seems to know how to unscramble. Now, as I say, mainstream schooling will be great for some students with a disability, but for some, It's a recipe for social isolation, disengagement, dropping out of school early, which basically means no education beyond that point, and a higher likelihood of a lifetime of unemployment. How on earth can that be considered a step forward? Similarly, commissioners recommended against group homes. Now, while there are no doubt some examples of group homes that are sites of dysfunction and abuse, which absolutely, non-negotiably, must come to an end, to simply outright ban them is to be ignorant of the counterfactual. Few would dispute that a group home is better than the old-style institutionalisation of people with disabilities. But there needs to be a good, tested and sustainable alternative that respects the right of people with disabilities and their families to choose for themselves what is their best option. And the question of employment was a contentious one for the commissioners too. Some commissioners were keen to see an end to what are pejoratively called sheltered workshops. But there will be some people with disabilities who like the dignity of work and the social interaction of having a workplace, having a purpose for every day, but who will never be competitive in the ordinary market because they can't, through no fault of their own, work and produce at the same rate as their peers. And to take away the ability for them to work and to be paid at a rate reflecting their productivity in the way that wonderful employers like Bunnings and Coles and Woolies do, in a framework that still allows their income to be supplemented by the disability support pension and other allowances, is to condemn too many people with disabilities to inertia and ultimately poverty. You know, there's about between 17 and 20,000 people in this country who happily and willingly work on these terms, and no one is forcing them to do so. But the policy that's been recommended by these three commissioners would have the ultimate effect of forcibly making these people unemployed. And that's just got to be wrong. We shouldn't segregate people with disabilities, but an overly ideological approach that has the unintended consequence of excluding good people who want to work from doing so isn't in anyone's interests.